The shotgun barrel gleamed in the late afternoon sun, as Rebecca Novak sat cross-legged on the patch of land she swore belonged to her, watching the tall cowboy stride toward her with purpose in every step. Yates Younger had been checking his fence line when he spotted the wagon, the woman, and the tent going up right in the middle of what he knew to be his grazing pasture. Now, as he approached with his hand resting easy on his belt, far from his own weapon, he took in the sight of her. Red hair escaped from beneath a dusty bonnet, freckles scattered across sun-kissed cheeks, and green eyes that held no fear whatsoever as she watched him come closer. The shotgun lay across her lap, her fingers relaxed but ready. "Madam," he said, stopping a respectful distance away, "I think there's been some mistake. This is my land." Rebecca reached into the leather satchel beside her and pulled out a folded piece of parchment, yellowed with age. "Actually, mister, I believe you're mistaken. This land belongs to me, has since 1852 according to this deed." Yates frowned, pulling his own deed from his jacket pocket. "That's impossible. I bought this property fair and square in 1861. Got the deed right here." She stood then, all 5 feet and 4 inches of her, and walked toward him with the shotgun held loosely in one hand and the deed in the other. When she got close enough, she held out the parchment. Yates took it carefully, his eyes scanning the faded ink. His frown deepened as he read the legal description of the land boundaries. They matched his own property exactly. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice careful. "My grandfather. He won it in a card game from a prospector heading back east. Kept it all these years, meaning to come out here and build something. He died last winter, left it to me." Her voice caught slightly on the words, but she straightened her shoulders. "I'm all that's left of the Novak family, and this land is all I have left of him." Yates looked from the deed to her face, seeing the determination there and the grief beneath it. He looked back at his own deed, dated 9 years after hers. "Who sold you the land?" she asked. "A man named Hutchins. Had an office in Sacramento. Showed me surveys, property records, everything looked legitimate." Rebecca's mouth tightened. "Sounds like Mr. Hutchins sold you something that wasn't his to sell." They stood there in the California heat, dust devils spinning in the distance, while Yates processed this information. It was June of 1867, and he had worked this land for 6 years, built a small but sturdy ranch house, corrals, a barn. He had cattle grazing these hills and a future he had planned here. And now this woman appeared with a deed that predated his by almost a decade. "I'll need to verify this," he said finally, handing the deed back to her. "The land office in Nevada City can check their records." "I already did," Rebecca said. "That's how I knew exactly where to find this property. Your deed is recorded too, but mine is older. According to the law, my claim supersedes yours." Yates removed his hat and ran a hand through his dark hair, streaked with sun-lightened strands. He was 28 years old and had survived the war between the states, come west to start fresh, and built something he was proud of. Now this. "So what are you planning to do?" he asked. "Live here. Farm it, maybe raise some chickens and a few head of cattle. Build a house." She gestured at the tent. "That's temporary until I can afford lumber." "There's already a house," Yates said slowly. "I built it, on my land." He could not argue with that, not if her deed was legitimate, and something in his gut told him it was. He had heard rumors about Hutchins selling disputed property, but the man had vanished before anyone could bring charges. "It's going to be dark soon," Yates said, looking at the sun sinking toward the western hills. "That tent won't keep you safe from much. I have my shotgun. And if a bear decides to investigate, or a mountain lion, or any number of men who ride through these parts looking for easy pickings," he shook his head. "Look, Miss Novak, I'm not conceding my claim yet, but I'm also not the kind of man who'd leave a woman alone and unprotected out here. My ranch house has a spare room. You're welcome to it until we sort this out proper." Rebecca studied him for a long moment, taking in his weathered face, the honest concern in his dark brown eyes, the way he stood like a man used to hard work and keeping his word. "I appreciate the offer, but I can take care of myself." "I'm sure you can, but there's no sense in being foolish about it." He gestured at the landscape around them. "Nearest neighbor is 10 miles east. Town is 15 miles west. You're sitting on 800 acres of land that backs up to wilderness. At least come see the house. See if maybe we can work out an arrangement until the legal matters are settled." She wanted to refuse. Every instinct told her to hold her ground, to show no weakness. But she was also practical enough to know he was right. One woman alone in a tent was asking for trouble, deed or no deed. "An arrangement," she said carefully. "What kind of arrangement? You take the spare room. I'll stay in my room. We share the common areas. We're civil to each other while we figure out how to handle this situation." He put his hat back on. "I'm not trying to cheat you, Miss Novak. If your deed is older and legitimate, then the law is on your side. But I've got 6 years of work in this place, and I'd like to find a solution that doesn't leave either of us with nothing." Rebecca considered this. She had traveled alone from Pennsylvania, sold everything she owned to make the journey, and arrived with barely enough money to last a month if she was careful. The truth was, she needed help, even if admitting it stuck in her throat. "All right," she said, "but I keep my shotgun with me." "I'd expect nothing less." Yates almost smiled, just a slight quirk at the corner of his mouth. "My horse is tied over that ridge. Help you pack up your camp." Together they dismantled her tent and loaded her belongings into her wagon. She had traveled light: clothes, a few books, cooking supplies, some tools, and a small wooden box that she handled with particular care. Yates pretended not to notice how her hands trembled slightly as she set it in the wagon bed. The ride to the ranch house took 20 minutes, following a worn path through the grassland. The house came into view as they crested a hill, and Rebecca felt something twist in her chest. It was modest but well built, constructed of solid timber with a covered porch and real glass windows. Smoke curled from a stone chimney. A barn stood nearby with corrals holding several horses. Chickens pecked in a fenced yard. Gardens grew in neat rows. This was not just a house. This was a home. "You built all this?" she asked. "Most of it. Had help with the barn raising." Yates pulled her wagon to a stop near the house. "It's not fancy, but it's solid." Rebecca climbed down from the wagon seat, her legs stiff from travel. She had been on the road for weeks, and the thought of sleeping in a real bed made her almost dizzy with longing. But she kept her expression neutral as she followed Yates onto the porch. Inside, the house was clean and simply furnished. A large main room served as kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace, a sturdy table and chairs, and shelves lined with supplies. 2 doors led to separate bedrooms. Everything spoke of a man who took care of what was his. "That's the spare room," Yates said, pointing to the left door. "There's a bed, a bureau, a chair, basin and pitcher for washing. I'll bring in your things." "I can help," Rebecca said, but he was already heading back outside. She walked to the spare room and pushed open the door. The room was small but comfortable, with a window overlooking the eastern pasture. The bed was neatly made with a patchwork quilt. A washstand held a ceramic basin and pitcher. The bureau was empty, waiting. It was more than she had expected, and more than she had had in months. Yates brought in her trunk and bags, setting them by the door. "There's a pump out back for fresh water. Outhouse is behind the barn. I usually cook dinner around sundown. You're welcome to join me or make your own meal, whichever you prefer." "I'll cook tonight," Rebecca said. "It's the least I can do for the hospitality." "You don't have to, I want to," he nodded. "I need to tend to the livestock. Take your time settling in." After he left, Rebecca sat on the edge of the bed and let herself breathe. The journey had been long and hard, full of fear and determination in equal measure. Her grandfather's death had left her alone in a world that was not kind to unmarried women with no family. The deed had been her salvation, her chance at independence. And now it was contested by a man who seemed decent but who stood between her and the security she desperately needed. She unpacked slowly, hanging her few dresses in the empty bureau, setting out her hairbrush and mirror, placing the wooden box carefully on the bedside table. Inside that box were the only photographs she had of her family. Her grandfather in his Union uniform from the War of 1812, her parents on their wedding day, and herself as a child. All gone now, except for her. When she emerged from the room, Yates had not yet returned. She explored the kitchen, finding it better stocked than she had anticipated. Flour, salt, dried beans, coffee, a few precious eggs, and even some salt pork. She set about making biscuits and gravy, working with the ease of long practice. Cooking had been her responsibility since her mother died when Rebecca was 12, and she knew how to make a little food stretch a long way. The sun was setting when Yates came in, bringing with him the smell of hay and horses. He washed at the kitchen basin, scrubbing his hands and face before sitting at the table. His eyes widened slightly when he saw the meal she had prepared. "Smells good," he said simply. They ate in awkward silence at first, the scrape of forks on plates the only sound. Finally, Rebecca said, "How long have you been ranching here?" "6 years, like I said. Bought the land right after I mustered out of the army. Thought I'd try my hand at raising cattle." He took a sip of coffee. "It's been hard work, but good work. Honest. You fought in the war, 3 years. Infantry. Saw action at Shiloh, Stones River, Chickamauga." His voice was flat, the way men spoke of things they would rather forget. "You. Too young to fight, old enough to remember what it did to my town. My grandfather fought in 1812, and my father would have fought in the Mexican War if he had not been needed on the farm. But he died before the rebellion started. Fever took him and my mother both, winter of 1858. She kept her voice steady. "My grandfather raised me after that. I'm sorry." "Life is hard. You survive it or you don't." She met his eyes. "I intend to survive. I can see that." Yates pushed his plate back. "That was a fine meal, thank you. You're welcome." That night, Rebecca lay in the unfamiliar bed and listened to the sounds of the house settling, the distant call of a coyote, and the soft footsteps of Yates moving around his own room. She clutched the shotgun to her side and wondered what morning would bring. Morning brought the smell of coffee and the sound of Yates already up and working. Rebecca dressed quickly and emerged to find him at the stove, frying eggs. "Morning," he said. "Thought I'd return the favor." They ate breakfast together, still awkward but slightly easier than dinner had been. Afterward, Yates said, "I need to ride out and check the herd today. You're welcome to come along, see the property. Might as well know what you're claiming." Rebecca agreed, and soon they were mounted on horses, riding across the land that both of them claimed as their own. Yates pointed out the boundaries, the water sources, the best grazing areas. He showed her where he planned to expand the herd, where he hoped to build more corrals. "You've put a lot of thought into this," Rebecca said. 6 years of thought. 6 years of sweat and blood and hoping it would all pay off someday. He looked across the rolling grassland. "This land is everything to me." "It's everything to me too," she said quietly. "It's the only thing I have left." They rode in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Yates said, "What if we went to the land office together?" brought both deeds, asked them to investigate Hutchins and his transactions. If he defrauded me, maybe there's a way to get my money back and you keep the land. And if there's no way to get your money back, then I'll have to figure something else out. He looked at her. But at least we'd know the truth. Rebecca considered this. All right. When? Tomorrow. It's a full day's ride to Nevada City and back. We can leave at dawn, should make it there by afternoon. That evening, they prepared for the journey. Yates packed supplies while Rebecca mended a tear in her traveling dress. They moved around each other in the small house with increasing familiarity, learning each other's rhythms and habits. Can I ask you something? Yates said as they sat by the fire after dinner. You can ask. Why come all this way alone? Surely you had friends back east, people who could have helped you. Rebecca stared into the flames. My grandfather was all I had. When he died, the people in town were kind enough, but kindness only goes so far. I was a burden, an unmarried woman with no prospects. The deed was my only asset, and several men made it clear they'd be happy to marry me and take control of it. Her voice hardened. I decided I'd rather make my own way. That took courage or desperation. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. She looked at him. What about you? No wife, no family. There was a girl before the war. Sarah, she promised to wait for me. He smiled without humor. She didn't. Married a banker while I was at Chickamauga. Can't say I blame her. Banking is safer than soldiering, and she wanted safety. You still love her? The question surprised him. No, I did for a while, or thought I did. But love can't survive on memories alone. It needs something real to feed it. Rebecca understood that better than she wanted to admit. They left at dawn as planned, riding side by side through the early morning mist. The journey to Nevada City took them through beautiful country, past pine forests and rushing streams. They stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat the food they had packed. It's beautiful here, Rebecca said, looking around at the towering trees. Different from Pennsylvania. Very. We had forests, but not like this. Everything here feels bigger, wilder. She took a drink from her canteen. More dangerous, too. It can be, but it can also be free in a way the East never is. Out here, a person can make their own rules, build their own life. He paused. Well, usually, when land deeds don't conflict. She almost laughed at that, a quick surprised sound. Yes, usually. They reached Nevada City in the afternoon, a bustling town full of miners, merchants, and dreamers. The land office was a small building near the center of town, presided over by a bespectacled clerk named Peterson. Both of you claiming the same property? Peterson asked, looking from Rebecca to Yates with weary eyes. That's the third time this month. Damned Hutchins. You know about him? Yates asked. Know about him, can't do anything about him. He disappeared months ago, probably with a small fortune from selling land he didn't own. Peterson held out his hand. Let me see the deeds. They handed over the documents. Peterson studied them carefully, cross-referencing them with his record books. Finally, he looked up. The lady's deed is legitimate and recorded as of 1852. Transferred from one Jonas Hartley to Samuel Novak in a legal transaction. Mr. Younger, your deed is also recorded, but the sale was made by Gerald Hutchins, who had no legal right to sell the property. I'm afraid Miss Novak's claim takes precedence. Yates felt the words like a physical blow, but he kept his face impassive. And my payment to Hutchins, you'd have to sue him to recover it. Good luck finding him. Peterson looked genuinely sympathetic. I'm sorry, son. You're not the first person he's cheated, and you probably won't be the last. Rebecca felt a confusing mix of relief and guilt. The land was legally hers, but watching Yates absorb the news made her stomach twist. Thank you, she said to Peterson, taking back her deed. Outside, they stood in the dusty street while people and wagons flowed around them. Yates stared at the mountains in the distance, his jaw tight. "I'm sorry," Rebecca said softly. "Not your fault." His voice was rough. "You have the legal claim, that's all there is to it. What will you do?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know, start over somewhere, I guess. Try to find Hutchins, though that's probably hopeless." He looked at her. "I'll need a few weeks to gather my cattle and make arrangements, then I'll clear out." The thought of him leaving, of the house standing empty, of facing that vast land alone, suddenly terrified her in a way she had not expected. What if you didn't have to leave? It's your land now. What if we worked it together? Yates turned to face her fully. "What are you suggesting?" Rebecca was not entirely sure herself, but the words came anyway. "You know this land. You've built something here. I have the legal claim but no experience ranching. What if we became partners? Split the profits, both of us work the land together." "Partners," he repeated slowly. "Unless you have a better idea." He studied her face, searching for something. "You trust me enough for that. You barely know me. You've been nothing but honest with me since I arrived. You could have tried to run me off, burn my deed, or worse. Instead, you offered me shelter and helped me find the truth." She met his eyes. "I think that says something about your character." Yates felt something shift in his chest, something that had been tight and closed since Sarah's betrayal beginning to loosen. "I'd need to think about it." Working that closely with someone, it would require real trust on both sides. "Take the time you need. The offer stands." They stayed in Nevada City that night, separate rooms at a modest boarding house. Rebecca lay awake wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. Offering partnership to a man she had known for barely 3 days seemed reckless at best. But something in her gut said Yates Younger was a good man, and her gut was all she had to guide her. In his own room, Yates wrestled with the same questions. Partnership meant compromise, shared decision-making, and constant proximity to a woman he was beginning to find far too intriguing for comfort. Those green eyes, that stubborn chin, the way she faced the world with a shotgun and determination. He had not expected to feel anything for her beyond annoyance at the legal complications she represented. But here he was, considering a partnership that would bind them together indefinitely. The ride back the next day was quieter, both of them lost in thought. They were halfway home when they spotted smoke rising from the direction of the ranch. "That's too much smoke for the chimney," Yates said, and kicked his horse into a gallop. Rebecca followed, her heart pounding with fear. As they crested the final hill, they saw the barn engulfed in flames, the cattle scattered and panicking. Several men on horseback were riding through the chaos, whooping and firing guns into the air. "Rustlers," Yates said grimly, pulling his rifle from its scabbard. "Stay back." "Like hell I will." Rebecca had her shotgun ready. They charged down the hill together, and the rustlers spotted them coming. There were 4 of them, rough-looking men who clearly had not expected resistance. When they saw 2 armed riders bearing down on them, they hesitated. That hesitation gave Yates time to fire a warning shot over their heads. "Get off my land." One of the rustlers fired back, and Rebecca heard the bullet whine past her head. She raised her shotgun and fired, aiming high but close enough to make her point. The blast echoed across the valley. The rustlers looked at each other, calculating odds. 4 against 2 might have been good odds if the 2 were not clearly willing to fight. Another shot from Yates, this one close enough to make the lead rustler's horse rear, decided the matter. "This ain't worth it." One of them shouted, and they turned tail and ran. Yates and Rebecca let them go, more concerned with the burning barn. They dismounted and ran toward the flames, but it was already too late. The structure was fully engulfed, and all they could do was work to keep the fire from spreading to the house. They hauled water from the pump, soaking the grass between the barn and house, beating back small flames that tried to jump the gap. By the time the barn collapsed in on itself in a shower of sparks, they were both black with soot and exhausted. Rebecca sank to the ground, coughing. Yates dropped beside her, his face grim. 6 years of work, he said hoarsely. The barn took me 3 months to build. We'll build another one, Rebecca heard herself say. She looked at him, at the devastation around them, and made her decision. Yes, we. If you'll agree to the partnership, this is too much for one person alone, and I think we're stronger together. Yates looked at the smoking ruins, then at the woman beside him. She was covered in ash, her dress ruined, her hair falling loose from its pins. She had just helped him fight off rustlers and save his house. Her house now, legally, and she was offering to share it. Equal partners, he said. We both own the land, both share the work and the profits. Equal partners, she agreed. They shook hands there in the ash and smoke, sealing a partnership that felt like something more, something neither of them was quite ready to name. The next weeks were a blur of hard work. They rounded up the scattered cattle, finding most of them but losing a few to the rustlers and the panic. They salvaged what they could from the barn's ruins and began planning a new structure. They worked side by side from dawn to dusk, learning each other's strengths and weaknesses, developing the easy rhythm of a good working partnership. Rebecca discovered that ranching was harder than anything she had done before, but also more satisfying. There was something profound about working the land, tending animals, building something with her own hands. Yates proved to be a patient teacher, showing her how to rope cattle, mend fences, and read the weather signs. Yates, for his part, found himself constantly surprised by Rebecca's determination. She never complained, never shirked the hard jobs, and had a quick mind for the business side of ranching. When he mentioned wanting to expand the herd, she immediately began calculating costs and potential profits, figuring out how to make it work. They still occupied separate bedrooms, still maintained a careful formality in their personal interactions. But the partnership was working, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, it was becoming something more. One evening in late July, they sat on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The day had been scorching, and the evening breeze was a welcome relief. My grandfather used to say that sunsets like this were God's way of apologizing for the heat, Rebecca said. Yates smiled. Sounds like a wise man. He was. He taught me to read and write, taught me to think for myself, taught me that being a woman did not mean being helpless. She paused. I miss him. I wish I could have met him. He would have liked you. He respected people who worked hard and kept their word. She looked at Yates. Thank you for keeping yours. You could have made this partnership difficult, but you have not. Same to you. He was quiet for a moment, then said, Can I ask you something personal? You can ask. Have you ever been in love? The question caught her off guard. I thought I was once. There was a boy in town, the blacksmith's son. We talked about getting married someday. Then my parents died, and suddenly he was not interested anymore. Turns out he loved the idea of a girl with a farm and prospects, not a girl with nothing but a dependent grandfather. She shrugged, trying to look indifferent. That was a long time ago. His loss, Yates said simply. What about you? Besides Sarah, I mean. No one serious. There were girls here and there, but nothing that stuck. After Sarah, I was not inclined to trust easily. He looked at her. You're the first person I've really trusted since the war. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Rebecca felt her pulse quicken but kept her voice light. That's quite an admission. I figure if we're partners, we might as well be honest partners. Then I'll be honest too. I'm glad it was your land I camped on. I'm glad you turned out to be a decent man, and I'm glad we're doing this together. Me too, Yates said softly. Inside the house, the clock struck 9. Rebecca stood reluctantly. I should turn in. Early start tomorrow. Rebecca, Yates stood too. I'm glad you're here. She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. So am I. In her room that night, Rebecca admitted to herself what she had been trying to ignore for weeks. She was falling in love with Yates Younger. It was inconvenient, potentially disastrous for their partnership, and absolutely undeniable. The way he looked at sunrise with hope in his eyes, the way he treated the animals with patient kindness, the way he listened when she spoke as though her words actually mattered. All of it had worked its way into her heart without her permission. In his own room, Yates was having the same revelation. Somewhere between the land dispute and the barn fire and the countless hours working together, Rebecca Novak had become essential to him, not just as a partner, but as a presence in his life that he could not imagine being without. Her laughter, her determination, the way she never gave up no matter how hard the work. He was falling for her, and it terrified him. August brought the heat and the hard work of haying season. They worked together cutting and stacking hay for winter feed, grueling labor that left them both exhausted. One afternoon, Rebecca collapsed in the shade of the half-built barn, her dress soaked with sweat. Yates brought her water from the pump, cold and fresh. You're going to work yourself sick, says the man who was up before dawn moving irrigation pipes. But she took the water gratefully, drinking deep. He sat beside her in the shade, their shoulders almost touching. We make a good team. We do. Rebecca, I need to tell you something. Her heart jumped. All right. But before he could continue, they heard the sound of horses approaching. Several riders were coming up the path toward the ranch, and Yates tensed as he recognized the lead rider. Who is it? Rebecca asked, getting to her feet. Sheriff Dawson from Nevada City, and he's got a posse with him. The riders pulled up in front of the house, and Sheriff Dawson dismounted. He was a solid man in his 50s with a weathered face and shrewd eyes. Yates, he said with a nod. Madam, sorry to intrude. Sheriff, what brings you out here, looking for rustlers? Had reports of a gang working this area. You seen anything suspicious? They hit us about 3 weeks back, burned our barn, Yates said. 4 men, well armed. We ran them off, but they got away with some cattle. The sheriff's eyes sharpened. Can you describe them? Yates did, giving as much detail as he could remember. The sheriff nodded grimly. Same bunch that hit 2 other ranches last week. We've been tracking them. Think they're holed up somewhere in the hills northeast of here. You willing to join the posse? We could use men who know the territory. Yates looked at Rebecca. I should go. These men burned our barn, stole our cattle. They need to be stopped before they hit someone else. Rebecca wanted to protest, wanted to tell him it was too dangerous, but she knew he was right. How long will you be gone? Few days, maybe longer, the sheriff said. Depends on whether we can find their camp. I'll come, Yates said. I'm coming too, Rebecca announced. Both men looked at her in surprise. Madam, this could get dangerous, the sheriff said. I can shoot as well as most men and better than some. Those rustlers attacked my property too. I have as much right to be in this posse as anyone. She does, Yates said, surprising everyone including himself. And she's right about being able to shoot. I've seen her. The sheriff considered this, then shrugged. All right, but you follow orders and stay safe. I won't have a woman getting hurt on my watch. I'll stay as safe as any of you, Rebecca countered. They rode out within the hour, Rebecca and Yates joining 8 other men in the posse. They headed northeast into the rough country where the hills gave way to mountains. The sheriff proved to be a skilled tracker, following signs invisible to Rebecca's untrained eye. They camped that night in a sheltered canyon, keeping the fire small and the watch careful. Yates found himself sitting beside Rebecca as the stars came out overhead. You didn't have to come, he said quietly. Yes, I did. We're partners, remember. That means we face things together. It could get dangerous. Life is dangerous, Yates. I decided that was not going to stop me from living it. She looked at him in the firelight. What were you going to tell me before the sheriff arrived? He had been hoping she would forget about that. It can wait until we get back. What if we don't get back? The blunt question made him face the possibility he had been avoiding. Then I'll regret not saying it. Rebecca, quiet, one of the posse members hissed. Thought I heard something. Everyone froze, listening. In the distance, they heard the faint sound of men's voices and horses moving. The sheriff signaled for silence and crept forward to investigate. When he returned, his face was grim and satisfied. Found their camp about half a mile from here. Looks like 6 or 7 men, and they've got a fair number of cattle penned in a box canyon. We'll move in at first light. The rest of the night passed in tense anticipation. Rebecca checked her shotgun twice, made sure her ammunition was ready, and tried not to think about what the morning might bring. Yates sat near her, and at some point in the darkness, their hands found each other and held on. Dawn came gray and misty. The posse moved silently through the hills surrounding the rustlers' camp. The sheriff's plan was to demand surrender and only fight if they had to. But when they called out for the rustlers to give up, the answer was gunfire. The battle was brief but intense. Rebecca found herself crouched behind a boulder, firing at muzzle flashes in the mist. She heard Yates somewhere to her left, calling out warnings and firing his rifle with precise timing. The rustlers, outnumbered and surrounded, fought desperately for a few minutes before 3 of them were wounded and the rest threw down their weapons. When the smoke cleared, Rebecca's hands were shaking with adrenaline. Yates appeared at her side, checking her over for injuries. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. "No, I'm fine. You, fine." He pulled her into a brief, fierce embrace. "Don't ever scare me like that again. You were the one standing up shooting. I was behind cover like a sensible person." He almost laughed, the sound edged with relief. Around them, the posse was securing the prisoners and beginning the work of recovering the stolen cattle. The sheriff came over, looking pleased. "Good work, both of you. We'll drive these cattle back to Nevada City, match them to the brands, return them to their rightful owners." He looked at the prisoners. "And these men will face a judge." The return journey took 3 days, moving the mixed herd of recovered cattle slowly through the hills. By the time they reached Nevada City and settled the legal matters, Rebecca and Yates had been gone from the ranch for nearly a week. They rode home in the late afternoon, both exhausted but satisfied. The ranch looked peaceful in the golden light, and Rebecca felt her heart lift at the sight of it. Home. When had it become home? After tending the horses, they made a simple dinner and ate in companionable silence. Finally, Rebecca said, "You were going to tell me something before the sheriff came." Yates set down his fork and met her eyes. "I was, and I should have said it before we rode into danger." He took a breath. "I've been thinking about our partnership, and I've realized it's not enough for me anymore." Rebecca's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "I mean I want more. I want us to be more than partners." He reached across the table and took her hand. "Rebecca, somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you. And I know this might complicate everything, and if you don't feel the same way, I'll never mention it again, but I had to tell you. Life is too short and too uncertain to keep something like that to myself." Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes, but she was smiling. "You fell in love with me, completely. The way you face down rustlers and work yourself to exhaustion and still find time to make the best biscuits I've ever tasted. The way you never give up, even when things seem impossible. The way you look at sunrise like you're seeing the world for the first time, all of it, everything. I love you." She stood up, came around the table, and cupped his face in her hands. "Yates Younger, I fell in love with you about 2 weeks after I arrived, maybe sooner. I just didn't want to admit it because it seemed foolish to fall for the man whose land I was claiming. Our land, he corrected, standing to wrap his arms around her. It's our land now. Our land, she agreed, and then his lips were on hers and nothing else mattered. The kiss was everything a first kiss should be, sweet and passionate and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it's fast. I know we've barely known each other 3 months, but I've never been more certain of anything. Marry me, Rebecca." "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, absolutely yes." They married in Nevada City on a bright September morning, with Sheriff Dawson standing as witness and half the town turning out to watch. Rebecca wore a simple dress of cream-colored silk that she had bought for the occasion, and Yates wore his best suit. When the justice of the peace pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed his bride with such obvious devotion that several women in the crowd sighed. The ride back to the ranch that afternoon felt different. They were not just partners now, not just two people sharing land and work. They were married, committed to building a life together. That night in the bedroom they now shared, Yates made love to his wife with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. Later, as they lay tangled together in the moonlight, Rebecca said, "I never thought I could be this happy." "Neither did I." Yates kissed her hair. "But here we are. Here we are," she echoed and fell asleep in his arms. The first year of marriage brought its challenges. They worked hard to rebuild the barn, stronger and larger than before. They expanded the herd and planted more crops. They faced a hard winter that tested their supplies and their resolve. But through it all, they had each other. Rebecca discovered that she was pregnant in the spring of 1868, and the news filled them both with joy and terror. The nearest doctor was in Nevada City, a full day's ride away. Yates became absurdly protective, trying to prevent Rebecca from doing any heavy work. "I'm pregnant, not helpless," she told him after he tried to stop her from carrying a basket of laundry. "I know, but I worry. What if something goes wrong?" She set down the basket and took his hands. "Then we'll face it together like everything else. But you have to let me live my life, Yates. I can't spend the next 6 months wrapped in cotton wool." He knew she was right, but the fear remained. He had lost so much in his life. The thought of losing her or the baby was almost too much to bear. As her belly grew, they prepared the spare room as a nursery. Yates built a cradle from smooth pine, sanding it until it was soft as silk. Rebecca sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her heart full of hope and love. The baby came in November, a long, difficult labor that had Yates pacing frantically, while the doctor they had brought from Nevada City attended Rebecca. When he finally heard the baby's cry, Yates nearly collapsed with relief. "You have a son," the doctor announced, bringing out a red-faced, squalling infant. Yates held his son for the first time with shaking hands, overcome with wonder. "He's perfect." "Of course he is," Rebecca said from the bed, exhausted but radiant. "He's ours." They named him Samuel, after Rebecca's grandfather. He was a healthy, hungry baby who quickly became the center of their world. Yates proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with Samuel at night when he fussed, singing off key lullabies that somehow always worked. As Samuel grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Word had spread about Yates and Rebecca's fair dealing, and they found it easier to sell their cattle and buy supplies. They hired help during the busy seasons, young men looking to learn the ranching trade. The barn was rebuilt and filled. The house gained an addition. The land that had brought them together now sustained a growing family. When Samuel was 2, Rebecca discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and in the summer of 1871 they welcomed a daughter they named Rose. She had her mother's red hair and her father's brown eyes, and from the moment she was born, she had both parents completely enchanted. "Two children," Yates said one night, holding Rose while Samuel slept in his arms. "How did we get so lucky?" "I don't know," Rebecca said, looking at her family with overflowing love. "But I'm grateful every day." The children grew, and the ranch grew with them. Samuel proved to be a natural with animals, following his father around and asking endless questions. Rose was more interested in the business side, showing early signs of her mother's sharp mind for numbers. In 1874, tragedy struck when a wildfire swept through the area, threatening the ranch. Yates and Rebecca worked desperately to protect their home, wetting down the roof and clearing brush while neighbors came to help. The fire came within 100 yards of the house before the wind shifted and pushed it away. They lost some grazing land but saved the buildings and the family. That night, as they watched the distant flames and held their sleeping children, Yates said, "I keep thinking about the day you showed up with that shotgun and that old deed. If Hutchins had not cheated me, if your deed had not been older than mine, we never would have met." "Strange how something wrong led to something so right," Rebecca agreed. "Makes me believe in fate, or at least in strange fortune." As the years passed, the ranch became one of the most successful in the area. Yates and Rebecca proved to be not just good partners but excellent ones, each bringing different strengths to the enterprise. They added sheep to their operation and started a small orchard. They built a schoolhouse on their property and hired a teacher, inviting neighboring families to send their children. Samuel grew into a serious young man who loved the land as much as his father did. Rose became a force of nature, smart and determined and not afraid of anything. In 1881, when Rebecca discovered she was pregnant again at the age of 36, both children were excited about the prospect of a sibling. This pregnancy was harder than the others, and Yates worried constantly. But in early 1882, Rebecca gave birth to another son, healthy and strong. They named him Daniel. "3 children," Yates said, holding his youngest son. "Our family is complete." Rebecca, tired but happy, agreed. "It's more than I ever dreamed of having." The years continued to pass, bringing the usual mix of joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge. They lost cattle to disease one year and made record profits the next. They weathered droughts and floods, harsh winters and scorching summers. Through it all, their love remained constant. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1887, Yates took Rebecca back to the spot where she had first camped with her shotgun and her deed. They stood together, looking out over the land that had brought them together. "You ever regret it?" Yates asked. "Leaving Pennsylvania, coming out here, all of it? Not for a single moment," Rebecca said firmly. "This land gave me everything. It gave me you. I'm the one who got lucky. You could have kicked me off the property when you found out the land was yours. And miss out on the best partner I could have asked for. Never." She leaned against him. "Besides, you were far too handsome to evict." He laughed and kissed her, practical as always. In 1890, Samuel married a young woman named Catherine from Nevada City. The wedding was held at the ranch, with half the county attending. Watching his son exchange vows, Yates felt the circle of life continuing. 2 years later, Rose announced her engagement to a lawyer from Sacramento, a match that delighted Rebecca since the young man clearly appreciated Rose's brilliant mind. Daniel grew into a quiet, thoughtful boy who loved books as much as ranching. He would often sit in the evenings reading to his parents, his voice bringing distant worlds into their home. In 1895, Samuel and Catherine made Yates and Rebecca grandparents for the first time with the birth of a daughter they named Rebecca after her grandmother. Holding his granddaughter, Yates marveled at how much life had changed since that day in 1867, when a red-haired woman with a shotgun had appeared on his land. Rose married her lawyer in 1896 and moved to Sacramento, though she visited often. Daniel showed no interest in marriage, preferring his books and his horses, and his parents respected his choices. The turn of the century found Yates and Rebecca in their 50s, still active and engaged with the ranch, though they had hired a manager to handle the day-to-day operations. They spent more time with their grandchildren, of which there were now 4, and traveled occasionally to Sacramento to visit Rose. One evening in the spring of 1902, they sat on the porch as they had countless times before, watching the sunset paint the sky. Yates reached for Rebecca's hand, finding it as naturally as breathing. "You remember the first time we sat here together?" he asked. "Of course. You told me I was the first person you had really trusted since the war. Still true." "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Rebecca Younger." She smiled, the same smile that had captivated him 35 years earlier. "And you're mine, Yates, my partner, my love, my everything." "Forever?" he asked, as he had asked so many times over the years. "Forever," she promised, as she always did. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that exceeded their wildest dreams. The land stretched out around them, their land, full of memories and promise. In the house behind them, Daniel was preparing dinner, singing softly to himself. Somewhere in Nevada City, Samuel was probably telling his children stories before bed. In Sacramento, Rose was likely working on some new business venture. The ranch would continue, passed down through generations. The house Yates had built would shelter his descendants for years to come. The land that Rebecca's grandfather had won in a card game in 1852 would remain in the Novak Younger family, productive and cherished. But in that moment, none of that mattered as much as the simple fact of their intertwined hands, their shared presence, their enduring love. She had camped on his land with a shotgun and a deed older than his. The cowboy had let her stay. And together, they had built something that would last forever. The sunset faded to twilight, and still they sat together, content in the knowledge that they had found what so many people searched for their whole lives and never found. They had found home, not in a place but in each other. And that was everything. Years later, when their children and grandchildren gathered to celebrate Yates and Rebecca's 50th wedding anniversary in 1917, the entire family would stand on that same porch. Samuel would tell the story of how his parents met, embellishing it slightly for dramatic effect, while his mother laughed and corrected the details. Rose would read a speech she had written about the power of two people working together in partnership and love. Daniel would present them with a book he had made, filled with photographs and memories from 5 decades of marriage. But on this particular evening in 1902, it was just the two of them, Yates and Rebecca, watching the stars emerge and counting their blessings. They had weathered every storm together. They had built something lasting and true, and they were not done yet. "What are you thinking about?" Rebecca asked. "How glad I am that you didn't shoot me when you had the chance." She laughed, the sound rich and warm. "I considered it. You were very annoying with your insistence that the land was yours. Legally it was, until it wasn't. Best thing that ever happened to both of us, finding out I had the older deed." "Best thing that ever happened to me was you," Yates corrected. "The deed was just the excuse that brought you here." Rebecca squeezed his hand. "Romantic of you. I have my moments." They fell silent again, the kind of silence that only comes from decades of companionship, where words are unnecessary because everything important has already been said. But Yates found he had more to say after all. "I love you, Rebecca, today, tomorrow, and every day after that. I love you too, Yates, always and forever." And there on the porch of the house he had built on the land she had claimed, under the vast California sky, they sat together as they had for 35 years, and would for many more to come. The cowboy and the woman with the shotgun and the deed, partners in all things, bound by love and the land they had made their own. The land that had brought them together remained their foundation, but it was the love they had built on that foundation that truly mattered. It was a love born of mutual respect, tested by hardship, and strengthened by shared purpose. It was the kind of love that inspired songs and stories, the kind that lasted through generations. And as the night deepened and the coyotes began their distant songs, Yates and Rebecca finally stood and went inside together, their hands still joined, their hearts still entwined, their love still growing after all these years. The door closed behind them, shutting out the world and sealing in the warmth of a home built on love, trust, and the promise of forever. In the morning, there would be work to do, grandchildren to visit, and life to live. But tonight was for the two of them, for remembering how far they had come and dreaming about where they would go next. Together, as they had always been, as they would always be. The ranch slept peacefully under the stars, a testament to what two people could build when they chose partnership over pride, love over fear, and each other over everything else. And somewhere in the house, in the room they had shared for 3.5 decades, Yates and Rebecca held each other close and counted themselves blessed beyond measure. Their story had begun with a dispute over land, and a deed older than his claim. It had continued through fire and hardship, through children and grandchildren, through 50 years of life lived fully and well. And it would end as all stories must, but not yet, not for many years yet. For now there was only this, two hearts beating in tandem, two lives woven so tightly together that they could never truly be separated. She had camped on his land with a shotgun and a deed. The cowboy had let her stay, and in that staying they had found forever.